You will die.
Hey guys, welcome to another video. In this video, I'll show you how to become the highest performing mage in your raid team. And to be a top performing fire mage, you need to do well in boss damage and trash damage. As you can see, the overall trash damage we do is 6 million more than overall boss damage, so you have to pay extra attention to trash mobs. As you can see, in my 8 weeks of AQ40 logs, I've been in top in all but one of them. For my gear set, I used the full 8-piece tier 2 set. Now this set is in no way best in slot, but it is what I have. I'll put a link to my raid set in the description if you want to check it out. These are the consumables I bring to every raid. I have them on a spreadsheet because I can prepare the consumables on my alt and mail it over to my main while he's getting world buffs. If you want to use this spreadsheet, I'll put it in the My Links section of my Discord. Needless to say, if you want to be a top performer, you need to make sure no one in your raid has world buffs, or you have world buffs, because world buffs just make way too big of a difference when it comes to performance. This is my talent build that I use for raiding. It's like your usual fire spec, but it's more focused towards AoE damage. For example, I have improved Arcane Explosion and improved Flame Strike. These really help to do a great amount of damage in trash mobs. I'll post a link to this talent tree in the description. Now let's get right to the boss fights. For the first boss, you want to quickly get into position as fast as possible and pop all your cooldowns. Make sure you have your Arcane Protection Potion up, as that will prevent any knockback to your casting. Normally we wait for 5 stacks of Scorch to pop our cooldowns, but because the boss fight is so short and the bosses start splitting, making it harder to damage them, we have to pop them as soon as possible. Sometimes the boss will split in the middle of your fireball cast and thus rendering your fireball cast useless. In that case, just be ready to quickly switch to the new target as soon as possible. If you stand where I'm standing, you should be in range for all the adds that spawn.
Your friends will abandon
For the
you.
bug trio, it's going to be different for every raid because it depends on the order in which you kill the bosses. I always use a Greater Nature Protection Potion for this fight. I also like to save my Blast Wave and Sappers for Princess Zauge, because when she dies, she spawns a lot of bugs. And for my other cooldowns, I like to save them for whichever boss I'm killing second, which in this case is Lord Kree. So, for this fight, Sapper or Blast Wave when Princess Zauge dies, put up Scorch and pop your cooldowns when killing the second target, and when the target is 10% HP, switch to the next target because the boss might die before your last fireball hit the boss. That would waste your fireball cast. It's better to switch target and start building Scorch stacks and start casting fireballs. And that's all I have to say for this fight.
Death is
For Satura, I like to start the fight by going into the center of all the mobs and use Blast Wave, Goblin Sapper Charge, followed by a couple of Arcane Explosions. Unfortunately, my Sapper was on cooldown since I used it on a trash pack earlier, but that's okay. And always make sure you have your limited invulnerability potion ready in case something starts spinning. If you're close to the boss and the boss starts spinning, just use a lip and move to a safe position. And when you're in a safe position and the Scorch stacks are up, just pop all your cooldowns and start DPSing. From this point on, if you positioned yourself well, you should not have to move for the rest of the fight.
your heart will explode.
For Frankris, you want to imagine that you're fighting against a target dummy. Cast your Scorch, and when 5 stacks of Scorches are up, close your eyes, pop your cooldowns, and start casting Fireball. Close your eyes because you do not need them for this boss fight. This will be a chance to rest your eyes mid-raid. For Vis, you want to use a Greater Nature Potion, and you want to make sure your Sapper is off cooldown. For the entirety of Phase 1, you only want to use a rank 1 Frostbolt. When the boss splits, get into position like I am, and start casting Arcane Explosion. Keep casting Arcane Explosion till all the mobs are close enough where you can use your Sapper and Blast Wave together. The boss should be practically dead after this phase. The Hoo-Hoo Run fight is just like the fight with Frankris. As a mage, you're basically fighting against a target dummy, but with just one additional step, which is just staying spread out. Other than that, there is no tactic to this boss fight. Twin Emperor. Now this fight is a bit complicated. For this fight, you need to learn how to hold back DPS. It took me 3 whole weeks to understand what that phrase means. But now that I understand, let me teach you. So for this fight, you only need to follow 2 rules. The first rule is keep your threat below the warlock. If you start dishing out damage before your warlock could build threat, you'd pull aggro and just get 1 or 2 shot by a shadow bolt. Now the boss's aggro resets every time the boss switches from one side to another. So keep this rule in mind when it does so. Now the second rule is dropping ignite before the boss teleports. You want to stop casting all your fire spells 6 seconds before the boss teleports. So when the teleport is about to go off, casting 1 frostbolt is fine, but do not cast any fire spells, unless you want to end up like me.
You are already dead.
So when should you pop your cooldowns? Once again, just pay attention to the threat table. When you see that the warlock tank has the aggro, just pop your cooldowns, but don't just blindly start casting your spells. If you see that you're catching up to the warlock's threat, stop immediately. Because trust me, you want to have your wall buffs to deal with the trash mobs you're going to encounter after this boss fight. So that's all I have to say for this boss fight, and I hope you do well. For Oro, you want to have a greater nature protection potion on, and you want to have a second one that's off cooldown that you can use mid-fight. Here your DPS technique is the same as a normal boss fight. Pop your cooldowns after 5 stacks of Scorch. The technique we use to maximize DPS without worrying about the threat is stacking the mages on the opposite side from the rest of the raid team. Because of this, you will most likely be out of range from any healer. The Greater Nature pot will absorb the sandblast that the boss will cast when any of the mages pull threat. The second nature pot will absorb the second sandblast if there is any. If the boss does not use a second sandblast, that's fine. The nature pot will not go to waste since you also need it for your Cocoon encounter. For Cocoon, you want to get into position and pop all your cooldowns as soon as possible. This way, you'll have your cooldowns up again for Cocoon weaken phase. Other than that, your goal here should be to get as much damage done as you can. So only move when you have to move. And when you do have to move, use Fire Blast and Scorch because those spells are very mobility friendly. When the boss starts using his Dark Glare and you see that the glare is nowhere near you, just keep DPSing and move with Blink. As you can see, when I move, I use my Fire Blast and Blink on cooldown. Whenever my Fire Blast and Blink is off cooldown, I use them to get into my position without sacrificing a lot of DPS. When an eye tentacle pops up, only damage it with your Blast Wave or Fire Blast, because if you cast your Fireball on it, it will die before the cast even goes off. When you're transitioning into the second phase, use your evocation as soon as possible so that you can have your mana ready for any claw that pops up. When claws do pop up, switch to it immediately. And since these claws don't have a lot of HP, you want to use your Fire Blast when the claw health reaches 30%. When there's nothing to DPS, just make sure Cocoon has 5 stacks of Scorch ready, so that you don't have to cast any Scorch when you enter phase 3. So when Cocoon does enter the weaken phase, pop any cooldowns you have available and start DPSing the boss. Now, if there's a claw tentacle up, it's okay, just ignore it, but make sure you have a good distance from it because it can do an AoE stun, which will interrupt your fireball. After that, the fight is hopefully over and the raid is done with. Now let me just quickly go through how I deal with trash mob encounters. Whenever you're doing trash and the mobs are this stacked together, Flame Strike, Blast Wave and Sapper are your best friends. Arcane Explosion is even better, but that requires you to get close and personal, which on the other hand might be a bit dangerous. Also, if you're using Mind Quickening Gem, you want to make sure you switch to Talisman of Imperial Power or use a ZHC for trash fights. Sapper charges are also incredibly good in trash fights if you use them correctly. As for me, I use between 8 to 10 Sappers in every AQ40 raid. And my Sappers alone have around 50k damage done in every raid. And that is just 50 gold worth of explosives. Just from this clip you can see the power of the mighty Sapper. Engineering is just way too good to not have in Classic WoW. And in case you didn't know, the starting trash mobs will not reflect any AoE spells you use on them, no matter what reflect they have. If they have Arcane Reflect on and use an Arcane Explosion, your Arcane Explosions will not be reflected back to you. That's why in these trash fights I always use AoE spells without worrying about their spell reflect. Other than that, when you're dealing with wasps, do not use your Flame Strike because these mobs die really quickly. Just spam your Arcane Explosion, pop your Toip, and you'll be good. So anyway, that's all I have to say for this video. I tried to keep it short, so I'm sorry if it's longer than 5 minutes. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to sub. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.
You